Hey there, tonight we're heading north, far north, past the last known village, past the last useful map, into a world of white, cold, and silence. We're here for glory, not for gold or conquest or empire. We're just here, because someone said maybe there's a passage. In this episode, you're going to feel your breath freeze in your beard. You're going to wake up in a tent that's colder inside than outside. You're going to eat your boots, and eventually, maybe, you'll vanish. Tonight we join the men who tried to reach the north. Sailors, cartographers, dog handlers, hunters, sometimes scientists, and sometimes just stubborn men with names no one remembers. We'll drift quietly through daily life on a frozen expedition. We'll follow the long, slow unravelling of the Franklin expedition. We'll walk among bones and shipwrecks buried in the ice, and we'll peek into drawing rooms in Europe where the explorers were mythologized even as they starved. Before we begin, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy long, slow, slightly miserable stories to help you sleep. And let me know in the comments what time it is for you, and how far into the Arctic we'll get before you drift off. Now take a breath, pull your blanket a little tighter, and try to stay warm. Because tonight you're going to be cold, for a very, very long time. You wake up inside a canvas tent and it's dark. Not middle of the night dark, just always dark. The canvas above you is stiff. Frost has formed along the inside seams. The corners of your blanket are frozen to the floor. Your breath clouds in front of your face. You blink. The inside of your eyelids feels sticky. The air burns in your nose. You slept in your boots again, because if you didn't, you wouldn't get them back on. You reach for your gloves. They've frozen to the side of the sled. You try to move. Your back aches. Your knees feel like stone, and everything smells faintly of grease, mildew, and men who haven't bathed in a month. Your companions are still asleep, or pretending. Nobody speaks much in the morning. You're somewhere in the high Arctic. The sled is packed. The dogs are restless. And you've got 20 more miles of nowhere to cover. Breakfast is a small scoop of frozen pemmican. Fat, dried meat, maybe some berries. You chew it slowly. It tastes like salt and fur. Then you sip from your tin mug. It's warm water, barely. Melted from ice you hacked out of the snowbank last night. You pee into the snow, it steams. Someone curses quietly. A buckle snapped. Another man picks at frostbite on his cheek. You break camp slowly, hands are stiff, nothing moves quickly. You roll up the tent, hit the canvas with a stick to knock off the ice, and strap it onto the sled. The dogs bark, the sled creaks, and then you begin again, walking, one boot step at a time, through wind-packed snow that squeaks underfoot, the same white horizon in every direction, nothing to see, nothing to mark, no trees, no animals, no sound but your breath, the soft clink of gear, and the wind. After an hour, your fingers stop hurting. That's not good. That's numb. You clench your fists, shake them, slap your chest. You keep walking. You check your compass. It spins. Magnetic north, they told you, is unreliable here. You follow the sun when there is one. Today there isn't. The snow crunches. Someone coughs. The dogs pull. You stumble. Lunch is more pemmican, still frozen, you chew slowly. You used to talk at meals. Now it's silent. Everyone eats with their eyes on the ice, and then stands up and walks again. The sled gets heavier, or maybe your legs just get weaker. You reach a ridge. You climb. You see more snow. There's a crevice nearby. You mark it with a stick. You keep walking. Eventually the lead man raises a hand. That means camp. It's early, but the wind is changing. It's safer to stop. You unpack the tent, stamp down the snow, anchor the corners, build a small wall of blocks to break the wind. The dogs curl up in a circle, fur to fur. They sleep quickly. You build a fire pan, use spirit fuel, pressure stuff. Melt snow for water, boil it with bits of biscuit and bacon rind. You sip slowly. It tastes like ash, but it's hot. You rub your boots, check your toes. One is going purple. You say nothing. Everyone crawls into the tent. 4 men in one canvas square, knees touching, breath mixing. You pull your sleeping roll tight around you. It smells worse than the dogs. Someone whispers a joke. No one laughs, but it's appreciated. And then, silence. You lie still. You feel your stomach turn, your hands twitch, your lips crack. You fall asleep cold. You wake up colder. It's only day 14. There are hundreds more to go, and no one knows what you'll find. You've only been out here 2 weeks, but time doesn't feel like it used to. There are no bells to mark the hours, no sunrises, only light that fades to grey and then darkens into something not quite night, but deep enough that the stars begin to appear. Your body aches in strange places. The joints in your fingers swell, your skin cracks, your breath whistles when you lie down, and when you cough, it echoes strangely in your chest. You've stopped changing socks. You only have 2 pairs. One stays tucked inside your shirt, pressed against your body in a damp attempt to dry it. The other, you wear, cold, wet, crusted with salt from the day before. They warned you about trench foot. They told you not to let anything freeze to your skin. But warnings are different when everything is frozen. You try to keep moving, but the snow is thick, dry, and deceptively soft. Each step sinks. Each lift of the boot is a pull against invisible weight. The sled ropes cut into your gloves. Your knuckles bruise. Your shoulders feel like they're being slowly ground to powder. There's no trail, no path, just wind-blown ice, blue-white ridges, snow dunes, and hollow sound. Some days you navigate by compass, some days by instinct. Some days you follow the sled ahead of you and try not to think about whether anyone truly knows where you're going. One of the men keeps a journal. He writes each night by candlelight. The ink freezes, so he warms the nib of his pen over the flame. The entries are short now. Nothing happened today. Killed a seal, lost a boot, heard wolves, sledge cracked on ice, fixed it. Rations were light. No one spoke at dinner. Socks froze again. Your own journal is less poetic. Mostly numbers, approximate miles, dog food counts. Which of your toes feel alive today? Every evening the dogs curl together in a heap of breath and muscle. One of them limps, another has stopped eating. You try not to name them, not anymore. There's a man in your group who sings, or used to, sea shanties, old drinking songs. Now he hums, barely. Only in the mornings when the frost is thickest and no one feels like speaking. It helps, a little. The captain still checks the maps, even though they're mostly blank. Drawn from earlier reports. Guesses, really. Lines sketched based on second-hand accounts from whalers, trappers, or Inuit who passed through seasons ago. You wonder if anyone has truly been here before. You wonder if anyone will come here again. At night you lie awake and listen to the canvas shift, to the wind curling at the corners, to the occasional creak of the sled settling in the snow. You listen to your heartbeat, to the quiet cough of someone 2 inches from you, to the sound of the Arctic, which is mostly the sound of nothing. There are no birds, no insects, no trees to rustle, only ice and breath, and the slow thud of your own pulse. You close your eyes, you sleep or you don't, and in the morning you wake up, put on your wet boots, and do it all again. It's only day 14, and then one day there's no sunrise, not a cloud-covered dawn, not an overcast morning, just darkness. All day. The men say it's normal, expected. They knew this would happen. The sun at these latitudes just stops showing up for a while. Weeks, months, no light, no warmth, just a dull, endless twilight. Then night. Real night. You light the oil lamp in the tent. You stare at the flame. It flickers in your metal cup. You watch it until your eyes water. Outside, the dogs shift in their sleep. A wind passes through the camp, soft at first, then harder. You tighten the ropes, check the pegs. The tents groan under the pressure. The canvas snaps in the wind like a sail. Inside you sit with the others. Not talking, not much to say. Cards are played with gloved hands. A few pages of a novel are passed around. So many times the ink is starting to fade. Food is boiled. Soup, if it can be called that. Bits of biscuit, Old meat, flour, and whatever the cook can coax from the bottom of the tin. It smells vaguely of onions, even though you haven't had onions in weeks. Salt, fat, grease from the inside of a lantern. You eat slowly. Every movement is slower now. Getting dressed takes time. Layer after layer. Wool, sealskin, fur, mittens over gloves, 2 scarves, 3 pairs of socks. You don't go outside unless you have to. But you do, because someone has to. The snow has drifted again. The sleds are half buried. The supply depot needs checking. The dogs need feeding. The latrine needs digging. Always digging. Every chore is hard now. Every touch burns. The shovel sticks to your gloves. Your breath freezes on your eyelashes. One of the dogs is missing. The men look, briefly. They find nothing. They return without speaking. Inside the ship, because you're not intense anymore, not in this cold. The air is heavy. The vessel has been frozen into the ice since late October. It groans sometimes, at night, like it's alive, like it's trying to move, trying to break free, but it won't. It's locked in place, a floating coffin of timber and iron and hope that's lasted longer than it should. Inside, the hold is divided into compartments. Sleeping quarters, supply rooms, a makeshift galley, a library. Someone's drawn a fake fireplace on the wall in chalk. It's not funny, but people smile when they see it. The captain holds regular inspections to keep routine, to keep spirits up. He walks the length of the lower deck each morning, gloved hands behind his back. He asks about your feet, your rations, your sleep. You tell him you're fine. Everyone tells him they're fine. Because the worst thing now, worse than the cold, worse than the hunger, is the waiting. You don't know what day it is. You stopped keeping track. Someone says it's December. Someone else disagrees. Someone else shrugs. No one argues anymore. No one jokes loudly. No one sings. The silence grows longer. The pauses between conversations stretch until no one remembers what started it. There's frost on the inside of the walls now. A thin lace that blooms and fades each morning. You stare at it sometimes, because it moves, because it's something. Your boots are cracked, your gloves are stiff, your teeth ache. You've lost weight, but there are no mirrors to remind you. You pass time by counting, steps to the galley, breaths between coughs, how many meals until you'll run out of flour. There's talk of hunting, but there's nothing to hunt. The world outside the ship is white, empty and hostile. Beyond the next ridge, more snow. Beyond that, more cold. You write a letter to no one in particular. You don't expect it to be read, but the motion of the pen helps, even if the ink is faint, even if your hand cramps halfway through. You go to sleep early, but you don't sleep. You lie still, you listen. The ship creaks, the wind howls, the men cough, and somewhere out in the dark a dog howls back. The days are gone, not shortened, gone. There is no sunrise to look forward to, no golden hour to mark noon, only a pale grey that fades into black and then stays that way for days at a time. You mark time in ways that don't make sense anymore. A fresh crack in the timber of the ship, the rattle of ice crystals against the hull, the way the dog team moves slower, even when fed, the fact that no one finishes sentences anymore. Even your thoughts seem slower. You try to recall what warm bread tastes like, or how green smells. You try to picture your village, but the snow fills in the edges of the memory. Inside the ship, things begin to shift. The men sleep more, but not deeply. They lie under too many layers and not enough. They scratch at lice. They rub ointments into cracking hands. They cough. Some begin to whisper, not about mutiny, not yet, just wondering. What if we turned back? What if the stores don't last? What if no one's coming? But no one says it directly. The officers still eat slightly better. A few more beans in the stew. A little more rum in the cup. You don't resent them. Not exactly. But you watch. You notice who eats in silence and who looks away when the cook opens the next tin. The tins are a problem. Sealed poorly. Some bulge with rot. Some smell of rust. Some contain meat you can't name. But you eat them anyway. Because hunger doesn't ask questions. You've begun to dream strange dreams, not of escape, not of rescue, but of light, of sun, of heat so strong it makes your skin sting in a good way. You wake from these dreams disappointed, because they felt real. The cold is a character now. It's always with you, in your boots, in your breath, in the way your fingers move, like they belong to someone else. You wrap hot stones in cloth. You put them in your coat. They cool before you reach the deck. You've started sleeping in your coat, in your gloves, with your boots unlaced but still on. It helps, a little. Sometimes you gather in the officer's room just to sit near the stove. It's small, fueled with whale oil and scraps of driftwood collected before the freeze. The heat barely reaches the floor, but the glow is something, a reminder. Someone brings a deck of cards. The edges are curled. The paint is flaking. You play in silence, not for stakes, but for habit. It fills time. A few men carve things, a pipe, a spoon. One has been working on a small figure of a dog shaped from bone. It's beautiful. You try not to think about where the bone came from. Occasionally someone reads aloud. A tattered Bible, a battered volume of naval reports, even an old book of poetry. The words drift through the hold. Not everyone listens, but the sound fills space. Letters are written and rewritten, then folded and tucked away. There's no way to send them, but the writing makes things feel real. You've stopped shaving. Your beard keeps your face warm. You've stopped washing. There's no water to waste. And soap freezes. Your hair is stiff, your skin is dry. Your nails split if you don't trim them carefully. You still try, because trying feels like proof you're still here. You fix your gloves, you sharpen your knife. You organise your pack, even if you don't need to. You find comfort in the rhythm. Wake, eat, work, watch, sleep, repeat. You do not speak of spring. You do not speak of melting. You do not speak of rescue. You just speak of the next meal, the next hour on watch, the next morning if there is one. The ship doesn't creak anymore. The ice has swallowed it whole. Somewhere far beneath you the sea is still moving, but up here, nothing moves. And that silence, that stillness, that's the loudest thing in your life now. It begins like so many expeditions of the 19th century, with optimism, with uniforms freshly pressed, with instruments polished, with tin-packed rations stacked neatly in rows, and with letters of royal approval tucked into coat pockets. In 1845, two ships set out from England, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Their mission? To complete the last uncharted stretch of the Northwest Passage, a potential sea route above Canada, linking the Atlantic and Pacific. It was one of the last great mysteries of empire, and it was waiting to be solved. The man in charge was Sir John Franklin. He was 60 years old, seasoned, decorated, soft-spoken, trusted. This was not his first journey north. He had served in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. He had led overland Arctic explorations. He had once nearly starved to death in the wilderness, an experience that earned him both admiration and the nickname, the man who ate his boots. But this time, things would be different. This time he had technology. The Erebus and Terror were modern, reinforced for ice, fitted with steam engines and retractable propellers, outfitted with hundreds of books, precision chronometers, fine porcelain, and a hand organ to play hymns. The crew numbered 129 men. Sailors, officers, cooks, engineers, marines, all chosen for their skill, discipline and readiness to face the cold. The ships left port in May, flags flying, families waving. They stopped briefly in Greenland to send letters home. Those letters, the last the world would ever hear from them. After that they sailed west, into Lancaster Sound, then disappeared. No signals, no smoke, no wreckage, just gone. But they did not vanish all at once. The first winter they anchored. The ice closed in, the temperatures fell, and they waited, as Arctic explorers always waited, for the thaw, for clearer paths, for luck. But the ice didn't melt, not fully, and so, year after year, they drifted, frozen in place, hundreds of miles from open sea. The men passed time as best they could. They read, they hunted, they sang, they rationed, they repaired the rigging, they played cards in the wardroom beneath the oil lamps, and they watched their food slowly disappear. The tinned meat was packed quickly back in England. It was a new innovation, industrial, efficient. But the solder was poor, the contents spoiled, the lead from the sealing paste leached into the food. Some men began to show signs of poisoning, headaches, delirium, exhaustion. Others fell to scurvy, or pneumonia, or the cold, and the rest waited. No one knew yet that this would be the end, not just of a voyage, but of all of them. But slowly, quietly, the Franklin expedition passed from the pages of a logbook into the margins of legend. They tried to wait, but the ice never gave way. By 1848, 3 years into the mission, both ships, Erebus and Terror, were still trapped, still frozen into the channel near King William Island, still surrounded by the same unbroken white, and the crew, those who were left, made a decision. They would leave the ships behind. No rescue had come, no thaw had opened the way home, no message had made it back to England. So they packed what they could onto sledges, blankets, flour, a few rifles, canned meat, books, a small boat, and they began to walk south. It was April. Temperature still dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius at night. The ice was deep, the snow was endless, and the sledges were heavy. Some weighed over 300 kilograms. They took turns pulling, hauling their supplies like mules across a frozen sea. One step, then another, then another. Their uniforms were neat. The officers wore epaulettes. Some pushed their medals into their coat pockets. Some carried silverware, buttons, and monogrammed plates. They still believed they might be rescued, or at least that they should be found properly. They left behind a note in a cairn, one of the few surviving records from the expedition. It listed dates, deaths, and their intended route south. It also mentioned that Sir John Franklin had died the year before. They didn't say how. After that, the note ends, and silence begins. The path they walked became known as the Death March, a slow exodus over ice and rock through a landscape where nothing grows and nothing forgives. Some turned back, some collapsed where they stood, some simply disappeared. Years later, searchers found scattered bones, skulls, ribs, boots still laced, a spoon tucked into a coat pocket, a small leather-bound Bible frozen between two stones. In some cases, the bones were burned. In others, they were broken, split lengthwise, as if for marrow. It's never spoken loudly, but the suggestion is there. They were starving, they were desperate, and they were alone. Inuit accounts from the time speak of white men wandering the ice, thin, silent, their skin cracked, their eyes vacant. They carried weapons, but not food. They didn't speak the language. They didn't know how to ask for help. They walked, and they died, and the snow buried what was left. Eventually, even the ice forgot where they were, until a boot was found, and a bone, and a note, half frozen inside a bottle. 129 men had set out. None returned. No battle, no explosion, no final scene, just silence, and cold, and time. Because sometimes history doesn't end with a bang, it ends with a long walk into the dark. They left the ships behind in April. The Erebus and Terror, proud vessels of science and empire, became little more than frozen monuments in a sea of white. No one knows how the decision was made, or when, or if it was unanimous. But in the end, they gathered what they could, and they walked. South, always south, toward the imagined promise of the back river, toward the hope of summer, toward anything that wasn't this. The sledges were loaded with food, rifles, tea and forks, books, Bibles, pewter mugs engraved with names that would never again be spoken aloud. Some men still wore uniforms. Others had stitched furs into the linings of their coats. Some dragged cutlery and brass candlesticks. One was said to be carrying curtain rods. Perhaps it was habit, or discipline, or the quiet belief that, if found, they should be found as men of station. But the snow does not care for rank. Each day they pulled. They took turns in pairs, hauling the sledges over uneven ice, across pressure ridges, through slush, past the black heaving cracks of the late spring melt. They kept to the rhythm, step, pull, rest, step again. There were no roads, no waymarkers, just cairns, built every few miles from whatever stone could be found. Inside, wrapped in canvas or tucked inside bottles, they left messages, brief, sparse, hopeful. Proceeding south with all dispatch, all well, God willing. But they were not well. Even before the walk began, they had been sick. The tinned food, industrial marvels at the time, was shoddily sealed. Lead solder leaching into every bite. Some tins were filled with meat too quickly, too carelessly. Botulism was a real possibility. So was scurvy. Their gums bled, their joints ached, their energy drained day by day. Add to that exposure, frostbite, dehydration. The snow was everywhere, but the meltwater needed boiling. Fuel was limited, each fire a negotiation. The dogs were gone, used early some say, then eaten. The men pulled the sleds themselves, day after day, week after week. Their footprints slowly vanished behind them. Inuit testimony, later recorded by searchers, spoke of groups of men seen moving across the tundra, gaunt, disoriented, some crawling, some staggering, some sitting motionless in the snow staring at nothing. They tried to hunt, but they were too weak. They fired muskets into empty fields of white, into the wind, into the silence. Sometimes they built shelters, tents, stone windbreaks, snow caves. Sometimes they didn't. They slept where they collapsed, wrapped in what warmth remained, huddled in pairs, or alone. The first bodies were found near Starvation Cove, years later. Some lying under makeshift covers of canvas and ice, some half buried, some left in open boats. Bones scattered in ways that told quiet stories. Hands tucked under heads, spines curved in the shape of sleep, skulls nestled together, spoons still tied to wrists, and the fractures, split long ways, cleanly, deliberately. Scientists would later suggest marrow extraction, an act not of cruelty, but of collapse. A decision made on the edge of survival where choices disappear and instinct remains. They didn't all die in one place, or at one time. The march broke into fragments, small parties, single survivors, people who turned back, or took shelter, or simply sat down. None were seen again, but the ice held the memory. Inuit hunters found traces for decades. Boots, knives, buttons, a small handbell. One man was found with a fork still tucked in his belt, another with pages of his diary carefully folded, though the ink had long since run to blur. All of them had names, families, assignments, dreams, and all of them vanished, not in battle, not in revolt, but in slow, frozen silence. The kind of ending that leaves no story, only questions, only the wind, and a trail of bones leading nowhere. They didn't return, not after the first winter, not after the second, not after the third. No word, no signal, no messenger, just the ships, gone. And so, the searching began. At first it was quiet. A few ships, a few cautious letters sent to distant outposts. Maybe they wintered too far north. Maybe they rounded the passage and were heading home by another route. But as the years passed, the concern deepened. Families waited, widows petitioned, newspapers speculated. The Admiralty, reluctant at first, relented. More ships were sent, and then more. They sailed north, into the same frozen silence, looking for traces, and slowly they found them. Not the men, not at first, but signs. A boot, a canvas scrap, a knife with initials carved into the handle, a spoon stamped with the Royal Navy's crest. On King William Island, searchers found a cairn. Inside, a piece of paper dated April 1848. It was the last known message from the Franklin expedition. A brief summary. The ships had been trapped in the ice since 1846. Franklin had died the summer before. The remaining crew, 105 men, had left on foot, headed south. That was all. A line, a name, a direction. The searchers followed it, and the ice gave up more. Skeletons, scattered bones, human remains half buried in snow and lichen. Some lay in shallow graves, wrapped in fragments of uniform. Some were found in lifeboats, pulled miles from any water. Sledges still loaded with supplies, a tin of tea, silverware, a copy of The Vicar of Wakefield. It was all still there, preserved by the cold, by the silence. And the questions grew louder. Why had they walked? Why had they dragged such weight? Why had they died so slowly, so methodically, without ever turning back? But the Arctic kept its secrets. The remains were collected, catalogued, buried again, this time with ceremony. The bones by then had stories of their own. Some bore signs of scurvy, others lead poisoning, still others marks that suggested something darker. But there were no diaries, no final confession, just what the ice allowed to remain. The ships, Erebus and Terror, remained lost. For over a century and a half they were little more than shadows on nautical charts. Somewhere, beneath the pack ice, somewhere, preserved. Searchers continued intermittently. New technologies came, sonar, satellites. Still, nothing. And then, in 2014, the Erebus was found. Resting on the sea floor, tilted slightly to one side, largely intact. Windows still framed with glass, wooden beams still holding. The ship hadn't broken apart. It hadn't sunk in violence. It had settled, quietly, as though tucking itself in for a long, cold sleep. 2 years later, Terror was found as well. Further south, even more pristine. Drawers still filled, cabins undisturbed, a bell resting upright on the deck, as if someone might ring it again, as if time hadn't passed at all. They had been there all along, just beneath the surface, just beneath the ice, waiting. Imagine it. A diver descends beneath Arctic waters. The sea is dark and hushed, thick with silt and fragments of ancient ice. Every movement stirs clouds of history. The cold presses against his suit. His light cuts through the gloom, revealing shapes, too symmetrical to be stone, too straight to be driftwood. And then he sees it. The hull, not shattered, not splintered, just resting. The Erebus lies at the bottom of the sea, half covered in sediment, its masts long gone, but its bones, its beams, its decks, its rooms, almost untouched. Windows still framed, cabins still sealed, the galley shelves still holding tin plates, quietly rusting in the salt water. It looks less like a wreck and more like a home abandoned mid-thought. A chair knocked slightly askew, a drawer still half open, a tea tin rusted shut on a wooden table. There is no panic in the wreck, no signs of violence or haste, just absence. Time passed, and the ship stayed where it was, waiting beneath the ice, not moving, not sinking deeper, just staying. When Terror was found 2 years later, the discovery was no less strange. It lay farther south in Terror Bay, where no one expected it, even more pristine than Erebus, so well preserved that some wondered if a crewman had anchored it there intentionally. Some cabins were still sealed tight, desk drawers still held paper, though unreadable, a ship's bell still hung in its mount. In some rooms the floorboards creaked faintly when touched, not with sound, but with the idea of sound, the echo of movement that once was. The archaeologists moved carefully, respectfully, cataloguing everything, documenting every spoon, every pipe stem, every threadbare scrap of uniform still stitched together after 170 winters. No treasure, no gold, just small things. A comb, a pencil, a needle kit, a set of boots still resting near a cot. These are not relics of triumph. They are artifacts of routine, of men who believed they would return, that someone would see these things again, even if they didn't. Above ground on King William Island, the discoveries continued. Bones, some alone, some in pairs, some arranged as though the men had simply lain down. A jawbone with perfect teeth, a femur scarred by frost and time, a hand still curled as if in sleep. There were buttons nearby, and a fork, and a rosary carved from whalebone, and with them, quietly, patiently, came the realization. These men had not died all at once, not even close. They had died in pieces, over days, weeks, months, moving south in slow shuffling groups, carrying their burdens, leaving behind what they could no longer bear. Sometimes dropping tools, sometimes friends. Some tried to build shelters, stone rings, piled snow, bits of canvas stretched over driftwood. None lasted long, and yet, in those piles of stone and bone and cloth, there is a kind of grace, a commitment, a determination, a refusal to give in all at once. They kept moving, even when there was no clear reason to, and eventually, long after the last step was taken, someone found them. Not to save them, but to remember, and in remembering to bring them home, not with ships, but with story. The Arctic was never uninhabited. It was not blank, not silent, not a mystery waiting for Europeans to unlock it. It had people, and names, and stories. The Inuit knew the ice, they knew its moods, its dangers, its kindnesses too. They knew where the seals would surface, where the wind cut hardest, where the snow hid cracks in the sea, and they knew when something was wrong. In the years after the Franklin expedition vanished, Inuit families, hunters, travellers, elders began to speak. They told stories of ships locked in the ice, of men in uniforms walking south, pulling heavy sledges, moving slowly. They spoke of camps, tents made from sails, fires burning low, of men who were sick, thin, quiet. Some were helped, given food, guided. Others died before they could speak. The stories were passed down, shared across camps, told to visiting whalers, missionaries, and eventually searchers. But for decades, no one listened. The British assumed they knew more. They trusted maps, not memory. They trusted paper, not spoken word. The Inuit spoke of seeing the dead, of finding bones, of metal tools, of knives stamped with English markings, of men cooking strange meat over low fires. They described a ship with 3 masts trapped in ice, its sides battered but whole, and a second ship, abandoned in shallow water, its hull tipped slightly, as if resting. They described uniforms and buttons and books. Searchers dismissed it, said it was confusion, or myth, or exaggerated retelling. They asked for proof, but in the Arctic proof does not last. The wind scatters it, the snow buries it, the sun bleaches it away. And still, the Inuit remembered. In the 1850s, the explorer John Rae was among the first to truly listen. He spoke with Inuit near Pelly Bay. He took their accounts seriously. He gathered artifacts, silverware, a watch, a spoon. He brought them back to England. His report included something else, something darker. The Inuit spoke of cannibalism, not in cruelty, not in violence, but in desperation. Rae included it in his findings, and the Empire recoiled. Victorian England could not accept that its explorers, its heroes, might have broken. Lady Franklin rejected it. Charles Dickens wrote editorials against it. They believed death was noble, heroic, clean. But the Arctic does not grant clean endings, and the Inuit, watching from the margins, had seen what really happened. They had followed the trails, seen the abandoned tents, heard the last words. Not all the explorers died alone. Some were with others, some were buried, not just left. Some perhaps spoke their names before the end, and the people who heard them carried those names home. the searchers decades later finally began to listen. They traced the stories, matched them to maps, to bones, to ships, and they found, again and again, that the Inuit had been right. The locations, the artifacts, even the sequence of events. They had known all along. They just weren't asked, not properly, but they remembered. And through those memories, the silence of the Franklin expedition was broken. Not with fanfare, not with rescue, but with recognition. With a quiet admission that the Arctic had never been empty. That its people had witnessed history, carried it and kept it safe. Until someone thought to ask. It's strange to think how long a memory can last when it isn't written down. When it isn't locked away in a journal or filed in a drawer or published with footnotes. But among the Inuit, memory was not just an echo. It was a responsibility. Stories were not fixed on paper. They were carried, passed from one voice to another, wrapped in snow and breath and time. And for years they told the story of the white men. They described the ships, 2 of them, that had come frozen into the ice, one with 3 masts, another, smaller, broken. Black ships with high sides, sitting still for weeks, even months. They saw the men who came from them, some strong, some limping, some crawling, some wrapped in cloth not suited for winter. The Inuit did not know their names, but they knew they were dying. They described things no European had told them, sledges pulled by men, too heavy with cargo, chests full of books, utensils, silver goblets, objects with no use in the ice. They saw boots worn until the soles gave out, jackets patched with sailcloth, rifles too cold to fire. They saw men camp beside cairns, melt in snow for water. They heard stories of others who had gone farther south, but had not returned. When the search parties came, they asked questions. They wanted dates, coordinates, proof. The Inuit offered memories, drawings in the snow, maps carved on driftwood, stone markers and gestures and quiet voices in cold air. And still, many of the Europeans did not believe, because the Inuit did not speak in the right way, because they wore sealskin, not uniforms, because they didn't write things down. And so, year after year, the searchers passed by the very people who held the answers. In 1854, John Ray broke that silence. He sat, listened, and did not interrupt. He noted what was said. He walked where the Inuit pointed. He found what they had seen. He returned to Britain with objects. A silver fork engraved with Sir John Franklin's initials. A watch. Boots lined with fur. He brought back not just artifacts, but truth. And the truth was not welcome. The Royal Navy could not accept that its men had fallen so far, that they had perished slowly and helplessly, that in the final hours some had eaten the flesh of the dead to survive just one more day, that the great adventure had ended not in triumph, but in hunger, that the only people who had truly understood what happened had no rank, no titles, no written language. They lived in snow houses, hunted by sled and harpoon, and had watched the expedition die and remembered. Even when no one asked them to, the stories continued, handed down, refined, clarified. They spoke of pale faces and blackened fingers, of men begging with gestures for food, of footsteps that led into the distance and stopped. When modern archaeologists returned more than a century later, they listened again. They asked new questions. This time they waited for answers. They found shipwrecks where Inuit stories said they would be. They uncovered graves near old campsites long described by elders. They mapped timelines based on journeys passed from mouth to mouth. And each time, the old knowledge held up. Not because the Inuit were guessing, but because they had been there. They had seen. The Franklin story is often called a mystery. But for many Inuit families it was never a mystery. It was just history, shared around a fire, on a long winter night, when the wind blew soft across the snow. The past is not always something you uncover with shovels. Sometimes it waits in a story, told quietly, repeated, respected. The Franklin expedition is remembered today not because of glory, but because the people who watched them vanish never forgot. And when they were finally believed, so much of the silence melted away. What remains now is not just what was lost, but who remembered, and how. While the Arctic froze its secrets into snow and silence, London kept the lights on. The ships had sailed with fanfare, with confidence, with the certainty of empire. 2 proud vessels, over 100 men, a seasoned commander. It was assumed, perhaps even expected, that success would follow. And when no news arrived that winter, then no one panicked. It takes time, they said. Ice slows everything. They'll emerge in the spring. But spring came and passed, and still nothing. So they waited another year, then another. They filled the gap with explanations. The men are overwintering. They found the passage and are sailing home the long way. They're simply out of reach. Telegraphs weren't possible in the Arctic. There was no fast way to know. Just letters, ships, rumour, and silence. In London, Lady Jane Franklin waited. Sir John's wife. She did not cry in public, she did not plead. Instead, she wrote letters, she made speeches, she lobbied the Admiralty, she gathered money, she published pamphlets. She did not sit still. As months turned into years, she became the face of the search. An unyielding presence in lace and steel-rimmed spectacles. A woman in drawing rooms filled with maps, charts, portraits of ships gone quiet. She campaigned for search expeditions, publicly, persistently. And when the Admiralty hesitated, she organised private ones. No expense spared, no route unexplored. If no one else would bring them home, she would. In parlours and lecture halls, the Arctic became a subject of fascination. Artists painted what they imagined the ice to look like. Novelists described the courage of the men, the crisp uniforms, the unfailing patriotism. Societies were formed, lectures were given, lantern slides of snow and whales and imaginary Inuit were shown to packed crowds. The Franklin expedition became legend. It represented more than exploration. It symbolised endurance, sacrifice, Britishness. And still, no word came. So they wrote poems. They prayed. They set empty places at dinners. Some believed the men were still alive, living among the Inuit, waiting to be rescued. Others believed they had perished honourably, sword in hand, flag unfurled. Everyone believed something, because believing was easier than knowing nothing. Each new search brought back fragments, buttons, journals, a silver spoon. Each one was examined, displayed, discussed. A single boot could fill columns in the Times. A scrap of cloth could reignite hope for another year. Lady Franklin read every report, answered every letter, held every relic. She became a figure of mourning but also of motion. The Victorian age had little room for emotion without direction. Grief had to be dressed in action. And so she acted, again and again. While the Arctic kept its silence, London became a chorus of anxious footsteps, quiet candles and polished boots waiting to be worn again. They never were, but it would be many years before anyone said so aloud. In drawing rooms across Britain, people learned to speak of the Arctic without ever saying the word death. They used phrases like delayed by ice, missing but not lost, awaiting further developments. The Royal Navy released careful bulletins, measured, formal, reassuring, in the way that silence can be shaped into a kind of politeness. Behind the closed doors of Parliament concern grew, but outwardly, the Empire does not lose men. It only misplaces them. Each year more search expeditions were proposed, some sponsored by the Admiralty, others by private donors, a few by Lady Franklin herself. Each time a ship left harbour, the newspapers printed hopeful headlines. Each time it returned empty, they ran portraits of Sir John instead. His face, calm, wise, firm-jawed, became a symbol, not of failure, but of perseverance, of quiet resolve, of British character frozen in time. In the schools, children read about him. In churches, sermons were given in his honour. In homes, people wondered what they would do if their own sons had gone north. Some made donations, some sent letters, some just lit candles and folded the paper neatly before setting it aside. Lady Franklin never gave up. She hosted salons where explorers spoke of sea charts and ice ridges. She hired search captains, interviewed survivors from past Arctic voyages, wrote daily in a ledger that grew heavier with each passing month. She had no body to bury, no grave to tend, only a husband who had walked into the snow and not come back. So she built a memorial out of movement. One expedition, then another, public lectures, newspaper editorials. She commissioned statues, ordered pamphlets, sent artifacts to museums. If he could not be returned, he could at least be remembered. And he was. The Franklin expedition became something bigger than itself, no longer just a voyage, but an idea of what it meant to endure, to disappear, to be brave, to be gone, and yet spoken of with reverence. The waiting never truly stopped. Even as the years passed, even as the men were declared dead by official decree, Lady Franklin died in 1875, 30 years after the expedition set sail. She never learned the full truth. But she had turned absence into legacy, grief into geography. Today her name appears on plaques, on landmarks, on stone memorials. She's remembered as the one who would not forget. And in the end, that may have mattered more than any compass, or map, or flag. Because while the Arctic claimed the men, London remembered them, in parlours and papers, in wax seals and candlelight, in the long, slow ritual of waiting for someone who will never return. When enough time has passed and enough silence has settled over a story, people begin to rewrite it. Not out of malice, not even always out of pride, but because grief requires meaning. And so, the Franklin expedition became something larger than life, something noble, something teachable, something fit for statues. The narrative was shaped not by the men who walked into the ice, but by those who stayed behind. Writers, politicians, lecturers in crowded halls with oil lamp projectors and velvet waistcoats. The story was polished. Franklin was cast as a tragic hero. His men were remembered as loyal, brave, unshakably British. The idea of suffering faded from view. The frostbitten hands, the broken teeth, the spoiled meat, all melted from the story. What remained was sacrifice, honour, a quiet death in service of discovery. Schoolboys memorised his name. Painters imagined his last moments, always tidy, always composed, standing by a desk, a map in hand, snow drifting softly against the hull. In reality, no one knew how he died. But that didn't stop the theatre. Lantern shows were held in town halls, projected images of imagined Arctic scenes. Women in bonnets dabbed at their eyes as solemn voiceovers spoke of duty and discipline and frozen courage. Plays were written, pamphlets printed, commemorative coins struck. The Arctic became a backdrop for national identity, and those who followed, other explorers, other expeditions, carried the weight of that story with them. They were expected to be noble, to write elegant journal entries, to die with dignity if it came to that. Because the Franklin men had done so, hadn't they? Even if their bones told a quieter truth. The public didn't want cannibalism, or panic, or madness in the snow. They wanted narrative. They wanted the clean line of empire, carving across a blank map into the unknown. Exploration became not just science, but performance, a lecture, a painting, a staged moment in the reading room of the Royal Geographical Society. Even failure was framed as progress, because every man who vanished, every ship that did not return, was used to justify the next one. There must be something worth dying for, they seemed to say. Look how beautifully they died. And so the expeditions continued. Some were successful, many were not. Each time the story was updated, not rewritten. Heroism was never questioned. Only the map, only the ice, only the timing. Even when bones were found, even when the truth crept back in with quiet, uneasy footsteps, the idea of the noble Arctic explorer remained. Because it had to. It filled halls, sold books, held together a vision of empire that reached all the way to the pole. The performance still echoes today, in plaques, in ship names, in long documentaries scored with cellos. We still speak of Franklin, of Shackleton, of Amundsen and Nansen and Parry. We speak of courage, of white horizons, of cold, clean death. Rarely do we speak of spoiled tins, of broken sledges, of teeth lost to scurvy, of the slow, ordinary misery of not knowing what's gone wrong until it's too late. But behind every statue, every plaque, every oil painting of a man staring into the white, there's still the sound of boots crunching on ice, and the soft, quiet question they were too proud to ask aloud. Is this the right way? So now you know. You've walked with them, slept on the frozen canvas, ate the cold pemmican, heard the tent flap in the wind, felt your breath frost your own face. You've watched the ship vanish into ice, watched the men grow quiet, watched the fire burn lower each night until it finally goes out. You've seen what it means to disappear slowly, to die not with a flag but with a cracked boot, a split fingernail, a final note folded into a cairn that may never be opened. And you've seen what happens next. The ones who stayed behind, they built a story, because the silence had to mean something, and in a way, it did. Because even now, when the ice creaks underfoot, when a ship is found after 170 years, when bones surface from a snowdrift in the spring melt, we remember not just the explorers, but the waiting, the letters, the long winters when no one knew what had happened and said so anyway. We remember the Inuit, who watched and told and waited for someone to believe them. We remember the ones who died and the ones who would not let them be forgotten. In the end, the Arctic does not give up its secrets easily, but it holds them gently. Frozen ships, faded buttons, a spoon in the snow. And through all of it, through the wind and the white and the weight of silence, they endured. Not just the men, but the story, the memory, the ritual of trying. And now, as you lie still beneath your blanket as the hum of the world fades into quiet, as your breath softens and your limbs begin to drift, you are still with them, on the ice, in the dark, moving, slowly, forward. The wind is calm, the snow is deep, there is no sound but your heartbeat, and the soft crunch of imagined footsteps in a place no one else will reach. And finally, there is rest.